I don't know if you want to, there you go. Okay. So welcome everybody. I see lots of familiar names and faces, so thank you for being here. I think Paula might have oversold it slightly. We're not going to go over completely how to manage your data, but I do want to go over some end of year tips, and some things to think about, and go over some things that seem to have been confusing people a little bit. Um, both throughout the year, but also now that we're getting down to the end of the year, it seems to be rearing its head a little bit more. Um, so, those of you who will be participating in next week's program manager trainings from State Ed, the slides that I share today are actually going to be part of that training, or that program manager meeting. So that does mean that you have some time to mull it over. And if you come up with any additional questions, you then have the opportunity to see these again next week. And certainly, if questions come up this week that mean that I need to revise those slides and make them more clear, then that's an opportunity for me as well. So we will get right into it. I want to talk about a couple of different things about end of year, and then of course there will be room for questions at the end. You should also feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question about something that we're talking about right at that moment. Okay. So I will share and start the slideshow. Okay. So let's talk about assists. First, I want to talk about the end of year and some targeted post-testing opportunities. One of the key things to remember, especially if you are new to all of this, is that you have only until June 30th to gather data that will affect your reports for the current fiscal year. You have until August 15th to get that data into ASISTS and make sure that it's in ASISTS correctly, and make any corrections or adjustments that you might find. But you have only until the end of this month, June 30th, to actually do things like post testing or add more hours for your accumulate more hours for your students. Whether that be in instructional offerings or in case management or whatever that time is that is spent with those students. The only activity that counts is up until June 30th of this fiscal year. Again, you have until August 15th to get that data into ASISTS, but your time right now is better off being spent with those students. And when I talk about targeted post testing, the best report to use is going to be your student assessment and attendance data check, which is available in your funding reports menus under either the NRS or NYRS data check reports menu. There's two versions. There's an NRS and there's an NYRS. The only real difference between the two is that the NYRS version is going to show you those half level gains and those students who are at half levels for the lowest levels of instruction. And it also will provide both of the TABEs that a student might have taken as their pretest. So because in NYRS, a student can make gain in either the math or the reading. It doesn't actually matter which one they tested lowest on. ASISTS is going to show you on the data check report, both of those tests are potentially available for you to use towards gain. But most importantly, I want to look at this report and use it to see two separate but overlapping groups of students. There are students who don't have a post test, which of course you're also going to see on data checks like students without post test, right? Or students not making gain. You're going to see students who don't have a post test, so they have not had an opportunity to show gain. but you're also going to see students who may have had a post-test and haven't shown gain. And so you're either going to see a blank in the post-test column for those students who don't have any post-test to use, or you'll see a blank in the gain column for students who may or may not have a post-test, but either way, they have not shown gain. Okay, so we can identify those two different groups of students from this one report. And then we can look at the further detail available on this, all on this one page, and actually technically all available in this download, if we look at the download of this data check. And we can see, when was the student last active with us? Have they already been gone for 3 consecutive months? And it's actually almost too late to post-test that student. Or do we still have an opportunity to post-test that student because they've been with us very recently? Some of the students in this example on here, we've seen them as recently as June. So they already have attendance for the current month. And so we know they're still with us. And if we take a look, we can see that, for example, number 98 on this report, they already have gain. We're good. But number 99 on this report, while they have a post-test and will be getting credit for a post-test, they haven't yet shown gain. We still have opportunity to show gain for that student. And they were with us very recently, so we actually still can post-test that student and not be concerned about, starting a new period of participation or any of those things that come along with doing additional activity after a student has already essentially left the program. The same cannot be said for number 100. So if we look at that, let me see if I can draw on here, number 100 right here, right? The last time we saw that person, and they do have a post-test, so we'll get credit for a post-test for that student, but the last time we saw them was February. And so they were gone, unless there's something missing from March, April, or May, that student's been gone. And they've been gone too long at this point, because if we were to test them in June, now we risk potentially starting a new period of participation, saying that the student has come back, that kind of thing. And at this point in the year, that doesn't give us enough time to have that second period of participation show benefit to us. If this was earlier in the year, I might have a different opinion, but we're closing in rapidly on the end of our ability to make any difference in that sense. Let me get rid of that. The other thing this report shows are the NRS eligible contact hours. I want to stress that it is the NRS eligible contact hours. This is not every single contact hour that a student has participated in the program, especially if you have training components either in IELCE, or if you are an EPI funded program and you have career and technical education. These hours are the NRS eligible hours, and it does not include activity that happens in a class that is tagged, excuse me, as instruction type of other, as all of our training or career and technical ed components are. If you have students who on this report show fewer than 40 hours, but they have completed a lot of training, they have an abundance of training in addition to their NRS eligible activity, you are permitted to post-test that student. Those hours should be taken into consideration, and state ed is moving towards that understanding. So if you have a student on here, for example, this student who has about halfway down this screen who has 38 hours, or perhaps the one who has 34 hours. If that student additionally had another 30 hours in training or other components of the program that are not included here, that student can be post-tested. You can get credit for that post-test. You can show gain for that post-test should that student show gain. So keep that in mind. Those numbers are potentially, or those post-testing, that post-testing activity can potentially make a big difference in your numbers. And those students who already have a post test, yes, you're getting post credit for that post test, and you may have hit your post test benchmarks and post test targets. But if you haven't yet met um, your measurable skills gain targets, we want to make sure we are looking at both of those things at the same time. They're interconnected, but they're not exactly um, in lockstep with each other. Okay. Okay. I want to talk about employment outcomes and some confusion that I have seen in the support tickets over the course of this year. And I want to make sure that people understand that when we're talking about employment related outcomes, we are talking about two separate outcomes when we are talking to any of the programs that are WIOA or FE funded. Those of you who report onto the NRS report, you are responsible for both second and fourth quarter after exit employment. Those of you who are AIL funded and you are reporting on the NYRS report, you are responsible only for that employment in the second quarter after exit quarter. These students are students who participated in prior fiscal years, right? I know I'm probably just reviewing things for many of you, but the students in our first cohort of students who we want to know if they were employed in the second quarter after their exit quarter, those are all students who were full participants, meaning they met the minimum threshold to be part of the report last year in fiscal 2025, and they exited in fiscal 2025. So those are students who we want to know, were they employed in the second quarter after their exit quarter? The other cohort we're looking at, again, for those of you who report on the NRS report, those are students who want to know if they were employed in the fourth quarter after their exit quarter. And those are students who exited in calendar year 2024, which is just the easier way of saying they exited in quarters 3 or 4 of fiscal 2024, which again, that's 2 fiscal years ago, or they exited in the first half, quarters 1 or 2 of last fiscal year or fiscal 2025. And I want to just be very clear. The key phrase here is after the exit quarter. We've had a lot of confusion of people putting in surveys or following up on outcomes and asking questions about whatever the next second quarter is, like the next second quarter that happens in the next fiscal year or the next fourth quarter, as static timeframes, right? The second quarter of a fiscal year or the fourth quarter of a fiscal year. And when we're talking about the exit quarter, we're not talking about necessarily the second or fourth quarter of a fiscal year. It might end up being those timeframes, but where we start the count from is when the student exits the program. So it is all based on when that student exits, and that's where we're going to count from. The outcome itself has to happen in the correct quarter. So that student needs to be employed in the second quarter after their exit quarter or in the fourth quarter after their exit quarter. And we need to ask specifically about that quarter. But the survey can be done all the way up until the August 15th deadline. You could be putting data in on that day. You could be speaking to a student and finding out the answer to this question on that day. And that's fine. It can get into ASISTS. You can get credit for that. But we're always going to be asking about the second quarter after the student's exit quarter or the fourth quarter after the student's exit quarter. So I want to take a little bit of a different approach on this than we have in the past. And I want us to literally talk about counting this out on our fingers. I want to talk about how we can see what quarter we're talking about or what quarter we need to ask about when we are asking the student the question. So when we think about this, I want to count on our fingers, but I don't want to count on our thumbs, okay? I want to pretend there's no thumbs involved because there's 4 quarters in a fiscal year. So we're just going to work with our 4 fingers. And so if we think about what question we have to ask a student, We can identify what quarter the student exited right on our data check reports. There's 3 versions. They're essentially all the same, but there's more accurately, there's 3 pathways to the data check that you can use to see who you need to survey. And that is your Table 5 data check, for those of you who are NRS reporters. It's the WIOA outcome survey tool, again, for those of you who are NRS reporters. And it's the AIL outcome survey tool for those of you who are NYRS reporters. And that report itself is going to show you, it's going to identify what quarter the student exited in. And then it's essentially your job to ask them the right question. So if we have a student who exited in Q1 and we want to ask them about their employment in the second quarter after their exit quarter, we can take that Q1 exit and we can add 2 quarters. And in that way, we've got 3, and we haven't moved on to a new hand. So if they exited in Q1 of a particular fiscal year, we're going to ask them about Q3 of that same year, because we haven't added a hand to this equation. I'm going to ask that student, were you employed in that quarter of the fiscal year that the student exited? I'm obviously not going to use those words. I'm going to use actual dates. I'm going to say, were you employed in January, February, or March of whatever year I'm asking that student about? I'm not going to rely on them to know what a quarter is, right? And then if I'm an NRS reporter, I'm also going to ask them about their income for that quarter. What are they willing to share with me about how much money they made that quarter? If I'm an NYRS reporter, I do not need to know about the income question. Let's think about that same student and asking them about their employment in the fourth quarter after their exit quarter. That same student exited in Q1, and I want to know where they employed 4 quarters later. Now I've got an extra hand up here. I had to add a hand in order to show all the quarters in question. So that means that I'm going to ask about Q1 of the following fiscal year. And that outcome, let's say they exited in Q1 of 2025, then I'm going to ask them about Q1 of 2026, the fiscal year after the year they exited. Again, I'm going to identify for them exactly what that quarter amounts to. Were they employed in July, August, or September of last year, right? Calendar 2025, fiscal 2026. And again, there are documents available. I know most of you have probably seen them. I can make sure that you get a link to that if you haven't seen them, but there are documents available to tell you what the dates are for each of those fiscal years. But it's about asking the right question. Let's try it with a student who exited in Q3. A student who exited in Q3, if I'm asking about their employment 2 quarters after their exit quarter, again, I now have, in order to add 3 plus 2 to make 5, I have a whole fiscal year plus 1, in which case I'm going to be asking about that first quarter of the next fiscal year. If I want to ask that student about their 4th quarter employment, same thing. I start with a 3, I add 4, I need 2 hands to handle that, and I'm going to ask about Q3 of the next fiscal year.
Hey.
Yep.
We have a question in the chat. Do you want to reply now, or do you want them to contact you later? Shannon has a question, a comment, actually. Shannon, do you want to mute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, so Kate, I have been working off of the same report, and I recently reprinted just so we could concentrate on Q4, those that need to be surveyed without the Social Security number. And entered the data in, and the next day when I went to reconcile to make sure my data counted, those students aren't even on the report anymore. They like disappeared.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. If you have some examples to send us, we'll be happy to take a look at that. If there's something that's, you know, going a little wonky in our processing, we want to make sure that we get that fixed now rather than later. So yeah, absolutely. I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head, but we can definitely take a look at that.
Okay, I'll send you a bunch of examples that didn't count today, but were on the report that I ran on June 1st on Monday.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just so everybody knows that, I mean, Shannon and I have worked together for a long time, but that is really the best way that you can help us to help you. If you have examples, if you have student names or anything that you can give us to help us basically look in the back end to see what might have changed or gone wrong or might not be processing properly, that is always the best thing you can do to help us help you. Okay. So one of the things that I just want to point out about the couple of slides of examples and, you know, the silly, simple fingers, right? I know it sounds silly and it sounds simple, but honestly, it's probably the easiest, least, you know, paper-driven, least problematic way of figuring out what question you're asking those students. And one of the things I want to point out is that none of these students were surveyed for a second quarter or a fourth quarter. So you see that idea of there, you know, there is a static second quarter of a particular fiscal year and a static fourth quarter, but when a student is expected to be employed is all individually dependent upon when that student exited. If this student exited in quarter two, I would then want to survey them about quarter four for their employment in the second quarter after exit. And I'd end up asking them about quarter two of the following fiscal year for their fourth quarter after exit. Those just by chance end up being a second quarter and fourth quarter of particular fiscal years. So there's a possibility that even if you were thinking about it in the wrong way, you might accidentally get the right answer. That's okay too, but it's not going to serve you in the long term. So we can move on from this. I also want to talk about the credential outcomes. Those of you who are serving particular populations of students are going to end up with students in the credential outcomes cohorts, which are HSE and post-secondary credential. And I've had lots of questions in reports trainings, lots of questions over the course of the year about how those students are identified or who ends up in those cohorts. And in a lot of cases, it's why isn't it more people? It's usually a very small number of people, especially in our HSE cohort. And I just want to talk a little bit about why that is and the steps to earning the credential or the outcome, sorry. First of all, for our HSE cohort, the group of students that we are looking at, first and foremost, are those students who were valid participants in calendar 2024. So again, we're going way back. This is students who had 12 or more contact hours, a valid pre-test, and they participated in calendar 2024, which spans the second half of fiscal 2024 and the first half of fiscal 2025. And so those students had to be valid participants in either 24 or 25, and they needed to exit in that calendar 2024 timeframe. So it's essentially, we start with the same group of students who are in our employment in the fourth quarter after exit cohort. So it's potentially that same group of students, but it's certainly not going to be all of those students because the focus narrows down onto those students who tested into NRS levels 5 or 6, specifically in ABE. So we're not talking about ESL students. We're talking about those students who ended up in what is considered ASE or adult secondary education. Those students, if they leave during this time frame and they tested into those levels, those students are the ones identified by NRS policy, by ASISTS policy, Federal Education Department, as being the students who would be expected to earn their HSE, either while they're with you or shortly thereafter. And so we look at specifically this group of students, and then we are looking to see if they earn the HSE outcome and a little bit more, which we'll talk about in just a second. The other credential are students who are expected to earn a post-secondary credential. That, again, by virtue of the NRS rules from ASISTS, they are, again, that same time frame of students who participated in calendar 2024 and who exited in calendar 24, but those students need to have been part of an IET or IELCE class when they exited, or in the year that they exited. And so those students are going to be the ones where ASISTS is saying, basically, you helped them with training. You were specifically tasked with helping these students earn a credential as part of their work with you. Did they? Did they achieve that? And in order to claim positive achievement, the HSE question has 2 parts to it, and the post-secondary question has 1. For HSE, there are 2 steps, and one of the things to keep in mind is if the student does not complete step 1, then step 2 is moot. We can get credit for surveying those students, even if the student does not earn their HSE, but we cannot get credit for the HSE unless that student is matched in the NYACCE HSE Assist data match. One thing I will mention about that data match, State Ed is leaning toward moving in the direction of sharing those HSE outcomes. So for those agencies who are partnered perhaps with another adult education agency, and maybe the student tests under one prep code, but you also had activity with that student for the fiscal year, State Ed is allowing us to credit that HSE or either the subtest pass or the HSE itself to both agencies. That's going to be a manual process. It does have to go through your State Ed rep, but that is a possibility. So if that describes something that your program is doing, then keep that in mind. But for the HSE outcome, while the HSE has to come through the data match, or as I said, this special sort of manual process, the second piece to that is that the student must also either be employed within 1 year of exit, or they need to enter post-secondary education or training within 1 year of exit. Both of those outcomes, both of those sort of second pieces, are entered as separate outcomes in the student's record, and they need to be manually surveyed. So for employment, what that means is that even if the student has a social security number in the system and you are relying on the social security number as the data match process for their employment related outcomes specifically, you will want to also enter, for these particular students, you will want to enter a manually surveyed employment outcome as that second piece, if that is the second piece or step 2 that you're going with. Otherwise, you also have the opportunity to add an outcome for that student if they entered post-secondary education or training. That can be that second step to earning the HSE as a credential. Please remember that this is separate and distinct from using that HSE as measurable skills gain during the year that the student is with you. That is, again, that happens via the NYACCE HSE data match, right? And that happens immediately in the year that the student is part of your program. If they earn the HSE or pass a subtest, that is measurable skills gain. That's separate from this smaller, tiny, usually, cohort of students for whom you are then responsible after they exit to find out if they've completed both of these steps. And these students are reflected, again, on that Table 5 data check, on that WIOA outcome survey tool. In most cases, this does not apply to the NYRS report, so it's not going to appear on there for those of you who are AL funded. In the case of the post-secondary credential, that credential as an outcome, again, this is separate from using that credential when the student is part of your program as their measurable skills gain for the current fiscal year. If they earn that credential while they're still with you, you're done. It's done. ASISTS is going to hold on to it. And when that student appears as part of the credential outcome,
Yes, dear.
Outcome section, then that is going to already be in ASISTS and you won't have to worry about it. But if you have students who did not earn their credential while they are part of your training program, part of your IET, IELCE program, then they have a year afterwards to earn a credential, and that can be counted as this outcome. And again, it's not everybody. It's not even everybody who exited. It's only these small little, I almost want to like make this circle like teeny tiny and put like an arrow to it, because even this visual representation is not proportionate to the number of students that we are talking about. We're talking about a very small number of students in both the case of the post-secondary and especially in the case of the HSE. Okay. That is what I have prepared. I have here one of our quotes, right, from Rosemary Matt. May she rest in peace. But remember, if it is not an ASIST, it doesn't exist. So if you are having trouble making something appear the way you think it should, if you are having difficulty getting that data into ASISTs, now's the time to contact support so that we can help you make sure that that is in ASIST in the way that is going to give you the most credit. And hopefully we can get all that in and all of that good work represented by the time the report is due. I see a question. And yes, so these cohorts of students, the post-secondary and the HSE, they're going to be on your Table 5. They're going to be on your program evaluation report, represented just as statistics. And then additionally, if you have students, and again, it is not a guarantee that you do have students in these cohorts, but if you have students in these cohorts, then they will be on Table 5, the Table 5 data check report, the WIOA outcome survey tool, and they're going to be down at the bottom. So if you have a lot of employment related outcomes to follow up on, these may be like pages and pages and pages down. So sometimes it's easier to go all the way to the bottom and scroll upwards instead.
Hey, I'm sorry. I hope it's okay that I unmuted.
Of course, yeah.
So on Table 5, I didn't check the WIOA outcome report yet, but I'm going to. But on Table 5, I only have my employment 2 and my employment 4, and I know that in EPI I should have 2 that are HSE credentialed because it shows up on my evaluation report. So I just don't know who those 2 students are because they're not showing up on Table 5.
Okay, let's check your WIOA outcome survey tool and make sure that, you know, they should both show the same thing, but if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there should be those students represented. If you're not seeing that, then definitely contact support and we'll figure out where, you know, like, do you have some sort of weird stray number on your program eval, or are we not showing you everybody we should on the Table 5?
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, my friends, I'm gonna stop sharing and we have time for other questions, ones that may or may not be related to what I talked about. But this time now is yours. So feel free to unmute or type something in the chat, up to you. Don't be shy.
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, this was sort of my test for explaining this during the program managers training next Thursday.
Yeah.
So certainly, if you have comments that you don't feel like putting in today's chat, you can certainly feel free to send that to me offline. I welcome any constructive criticism on this explanation. I think we've had confusion. There's always confusion, even people who are long-time ASISTS users, like we don't do the outcomes every day. So it's one of those things that even if you got it last year and you ended up successfully putting in your outcomes, sometimes we need a little refresher. So I'm just looking for other methods of explaining, and hopefully something, you know, if one way doesn't work for somebody, maybe another way does. I'm looking.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
taking your time and coming presenting to our NYACCE members. And I also want to thank everyone for taking your time to join us today. We appreciate your presence here. And any last questions? Anything that you want to share? Take advantage of Kate 100%? No? All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll post the recording on our website. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kate. I appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you.